the golden dress and broken promises. The golden silk felt like liquid starlight against my skin as I smoothed the dress one final time, studying my reflection in the hotel room mirror. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. My sister Rosa's wedding at the historic Riverstone Manor, complete with fairy lights strung through ancient oak trees and the promise of dancing under the stars with Marcus until dawn. I had chosen this dress specifically for him. The way the fabric caught the light, how it hugged my curves while flowing elegantly to my ankles, the delicate beading that sparkled with every movement. 3 months of planning, dreaming, and imagining this moment had led to this. "You look absolutely radiant, Val," Rosa called from across the room, adjusting her own veil for the 1,000th time. Her voice carried that nervous excitement that only brides possess, but her eyes held genuine warmth when she looked at me. "Marcus won't be able to take his eyes off you tonight." I smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation in my stomach. "I hope so. I feel like we've barely had time together lately with his new promotion and all my gallery exhibitions. Tonight feels like our chance to reconnect, you know." Rosa nodded knowingly. As the older sister by 4 years, she had always been my confidant, the one who listened to my romantic dreams and offered gentle advice. "Just remember, tonight is about celebrating love in all its forms, yours included." The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Rosa looked ethereal as she walked down the rose-petal-strewn aisle, and I felt tears pricking my eyes, watching her marry James, her college sweetheart who looked at her like she hung the moon. Marcus sat beside me during the service, his hand warm in mine, and I allowed myself to imagine our own future wedding, maybe next spring, perhaps in the botanical gardens where we had our first date. But something shifted the moment we entered the reception hall. The ballroom at Riverstone Manor was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls. White roses and baby's breath created aromatic clouds on every table, and the dance floor gleamed like polished marble under soft lighting. A 12-piece orchestra filled the space with romantic melodies that seemed to float on the warm evening air. "Wow, Rosa really outdid herself," Marcus murmured, but his voice sounded distant, distracted. I followed his gaze across the room and felt my heart sink like a stone. There, holding court near the champagne fountain, stood my cousin Celeste Rivera. She had arrived fashionably late, as always, wearing a figure-hugging burgundy dress that left little to the imagination and commanded attention from every corner of the room. Her dark hair cascaded in perfect waves over one shoulder, and her laugh, that tinkling musical sound that had captivated people since we were children, carried over the gentle hum of conversation. "I didn't know Celeste was coming," I said, quietly, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. Marcus was already standing, straightening his tie. "I should go say hello. It would be rude not to greet family, right?" But his eager expression told a different story entirely. I watched as he crossed the room, his stride confident and purposeful in a way I rarely saw anymore. Within moments, he was part of Celeste's magnetic circle, laughing at something she said, accepting a champagne flute from her perfectly manicured fingers. The golden dress that had felt so perfect an hour ago suddenly seemed dull, inadequate, invisible. Throughout dinner, I found myself stealing glances at their table. Marcus had somehow ended up seated next to Celeste during the cocktail hour confusion, leaving me alone at our assigned table with distant relatives who asked polite questions about my work at the gallery while checking their phones. I pushed food around my plate, the carefully prepared salmon tasting like ash in my mouth, as I watched Marcus lean in close to hear whatever witty observation Celeste was sharing. When the dancing began, I waited. I sat at our table, hands folded, in my lap, watching as couple after couple took to the floor. Rosa and James shared their first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I felt tears threaten again, but this time for entirely different reasons. The song ended, and traditionally, this would be the moment when Marcus would appear at my elbow, offering his hand with that crooked smile I had fallen in love with 2 years ago. Instead, I watched him extend his hand to Celeste. They moved together, like they had been dancing for years, her burgundy dress swirling around his legs as he spun her expertly across the floor. Her head thrown back in laughter, his face animated in a way I hadn't seen in months. Other guests began clearing space for them, creating a wider circle to admire their obvious chemistry. I heard whispered comments from nearby tables. What a gorgeous couple! And they're so natural together, each word landing like a physical blow. Song after song played, and still Marcus didn't return to our table. I sipped my wine slowly, maintaining my composure even as my heart shattered into smaller and smaller pieces. The golden dress that had made me feel like a princess now felt like a costume I was wearing to play a part no one cared about. Bishu, beading that had sparkled so beautifully in the hotel mirror now seemed gaudy, trying too hard to capture attention that was never coming my way. By the time the orchestra announced the last dance, I had made a decision that would change everything. The moment everything changed. I stood slowly from the table, my legs unsteady not from the wine, but from the weight of what I was about to do. The golden dress suddenly felt different against my skin, not like a costume anymore, but like armor. I smoothed the silk one final time and lifted my chin, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't even know I possessed. "Excuse me," I murmured to the elderly aunt beside me, who had been regaling me with stories about her cat's dietary preferences while I watched my relationship crumble on the dance floor. She barely acknowledged my departure, already turning to engage another unfortunate table-mate. As I walked toward the edge of the dance floor, I caught sight of myself in one of the ornate mirrors lining the ballroom walls. The woman looking back at me wasn't the heartbroken, invisible wallflower I felt like inside. She was elegant, composed, beautiful. The golden dress caught the light from the chandeliers, creating an almost ethereal glow around her figure. For the first time all evening, I really saw myself clearly. "Valentina Rodriguez, is that really you?" The voice came from behind me, warm and familiar, despite the years that had passed. I turned to find Diego Santos standing there, camera hanging. Around his neck, a genuine smile spreading across his face. He looked different from the lanky photography student I remembered from college. Broader shoulders filled out his perfectly tailored black suit. His dark hair was styled rather than perpetually messy, and confidence radiated from his stance. "Diego!" I breathed, surprise momentarily overshadowing my heartbreak. "I had no idea you were photographing tonight." He gestured to his professional camera equipment set up discreetly along the perimeter of the room. "Rosa hired me last month. She mentioned you'd be here, but I've been so busy capturing all the perfect moments, I haven't had a chance to find you." His eyes traveled over me appreciatively, but respectfully. "You look absolutely stunning, by the way. That dress is incredible." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, the first genuine warmth I'd experienced all evening. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. I barely recognized you without paint stains on your clothes." Diego laughed, the sound rich and infectious. "Those days are behind me, thankfully, though I still paint in my spare time." He paused, his expression growing more serious as he studied my face with the observant eye of someone who made his living reading people through a lens. "Are you all right? You seem distant tonight." Before I could answer, another peal of Celeste's laughter drifted across the room. Diego's gaze followed the sound, landing on Marcus, spinning my cousin through an elaborate dip that had other guests applauding. When he looked back at me, understanding flickered in his dark eyes. "Ah," he said quietly. I see. The sympathy in his voice nearly undid my carefully maintained composure. It's fine, I said quickly, wrapping my arms around myself. They're just dancing, having fun. There's nothing wrong with that. No, Diego agreed. There isn't. But there is something wrong with a man who brings a woman like you to a wedding and then spends the entire evening making her feel invisible. His words hit me like a physical blow, partly because they were exactly what I needed to hear, and partly because they confirmed that my humiliation was visible to others. You noticed? Valentina. I've been watching people through a camera lens for over an hour. I notice everything. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. I've seen you sitting alone at that table, putting on a brave face while your heart breaks a little more with each song. I've seen the way you light up every time you think he's coming back to you, and the way that light dims when he doesn't. Tears threatened again, but I blinked them back, fiercely. I don't want to be that woman, Diego, the one who falls apart at her sister's wedding because her boyfriend is paying attention to someone else. Then don't be, he said simply. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Dance with me instead. I stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because it might make him jealous? Diego's tone was gentle but direct. Or because it might remind you that you deserve someone's full attention. The orchestra was transitioning into a slower song, something romantic and sweet that should have been perfect for Marcus and me. Instead, I was standing here with my college friend, feeling more seen and valued than I had all evening. I haven't seen you in 3 years, I said, deflecting. Then we have a lot to catch up on. His hand remained extended, patient, waiting for my decision. One dance, Val, for old time's sake, if nothing else. I looked across the room one more time. Marcus was now attempting to teach Celeste some complicated ballroom move, both of them laughing as she deliberately stumbled into his arms. He hadn't looked in my direction once since dinner ended. That's when something crystallized inside me. A realization that had been building all evening finally broke the surface. I deserved better than this. I deserved someone who would choose me, who would want to dance with me, who would make me feel like the most important person in the room rather than an afterthought. I placed my hand in Diego's, feeling the warmth and strength of his fingers as they closed gently around mine. One dance, I agreed, and felt my spine straighten as I stepped onto the dance floor. Diego's hand settled at the small of my back with perfect propriety, and suddenly we were moving together across the polished marble. He was an excellent dancer, confident without being showy, leading me through simple steps that made me feel graceful rather than clumsy. The golden dress swirled around my legs as he guided me through a gentle turn, and for the first time all evening, I felt beautiful again. You know, he said as we swayed to the music, I always wondered what happened to the girl who used to sneak into the art building at midnight to work on her sculptures. I smiled, remembering those late-night sessions in the studio. She grew up and became a curator instead. Turns out I'm better at recognizing great art than creating it. I doubt that, Diego replied. Some of us just need different canvases. As we danced, I became aware of subtle changes in the atmosphere around us. Conversations seemed to quiet slightly as we passed, and I caught glimpses of approving smiles from Rosa's friends. The elderly relatives who had ignored me at dinner were now watching with obvious interest. But most importantly, from the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus finally look up from Celeste, his expression shifting as he registered what he was seeing. The song ended, but Diego didn't immediately release. Me, thank you, he said quietly. That was exactly what I needed after 5 hours of capturing other people's happiness. Thank you, I replied, meaning it completely. I had forgotten what it felt like to actually enjoy dancing. As applause rippled through the room for the orchestra, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the intoxicating sensation of being wanted, valued, chosen, not as a consolation prize or an afterthought, but as someone worth pursuing. The transformation had begun. Dancing through the fire. The applause faded, but Diego's hand remained warm against the small of my back. "Would you like some air?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "The gardens are beautiful at night, and I think you could use a moment away from all the watching eyes." I hadn't noticed until he mentioned it, but we had indeed become the center of subtle attention. Rosa's college friends were whispering behind champagne flutes, their expressions appreciative and curious. Even the orchestra conductor had glanced our way with an approving nod, but most significantly, Marcus had stopped mid-sentence in whatever he was saying to Celeste, his face a mask of confusion and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "I'd love another dance." Diego's eyebrows rose slightly, but his smile was warm and encouraging. "Are you sure? I don't want to monopolize your evening." "Trust me," I replied, glancing pointedly toward where Marcus was now staring openly at us. "You're not monopolizing anything that was being used." The orchestra began a livelier number, something with a Latin rhythm that made couples throughout the room step closer together and move with more passion. Diego's eyes lit up with recognition. "Perfect," he murmured. "I hope you remember how to salsa." Before I could protest that I had only taken a few classes in college, Diego was guiding me into the basic steps with such smooth confidence that my body remembered the rhythm instinctively. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, the familiar count echoing in my mind as we found our groove. "Relax," Diego said as he led me through a simple turn. "Don't think so much. Just feel the music." And suddenly I did. The golden dress flared out as he spun me, the fabric catching the light like liquid fire. My hair, which had been carefully pinned in an elegant updo for the ceremony, began to come loose as we moved, soft tendrils framing my face. Instead of feeling disheveled, I felt alive, vibrant, free. The other dancers on the floor began to step back, creating space for us as Diego led me through increasingly complex moves. A dip here, a dramatic turn there, our bodies moving together like we had been partners for years instead of reuniting after 3 years apart. I laughed. Actually, laughed as he guided me through a series of spins that left the golden dress floating around me like a cloud of starlight. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" I asked breathlessly during a brief pause in the music. "Buenos Aires," he replied with a grin. "I spent 6 months there last year documenting tango dances. Turns out you can't photograph something improperly without understanding it yourself." The music picked up again, and this time Diego pulled me closer, our movements becoming more intimate, more charged. I was vaguely aware of the growing circle of spectators, of phones being discreetly lifted to capture our performance, of the electricity that seemed to crackle between us with each step. What I was much more acutely aware of was Marcus pushing through the crowd, his face tight with an emotion I had rarely seen from him, genuine distress. Celeste followed in his wake, her perfect composure finally showing cracks as she realized she was no longer the center of attention. "Valentina!" Marcus called out as the song ended to enthusiastic applause. His voice carried across the dance floor with an urgency that made several people turn to look. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Diego's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. At my waist, a silent question. I could feel the weight of the entire ballroom's attention on us now, the delicious tension of a drama unfolding in real time. Part of me, The part that had spent 2 years accommodating Marcus's moods, making excuses for his behavior, accepting whatever scraps of attention he offered, wanted to go to him immediately. But a stronger part, the part that had been awakened by Diego's respectful attention and genuine appreciation, wanted to make Marcus wait, to let him feel a fraction of the uncertainty and longing I had experienced all evening. "In a moment," I called back, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "I promised Diego the next dance." The collective intake of breath from the watching crowd was audible. Rosa, who had been chatting with relatives near the cake table, looked over with wide eyes and barely suppressed delight. Even the orchestra conductor seemed to straighten with interest, raising his baton with theatrical flair. Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, anger, embarrassment, and finally, something that looked like dawning realization. Celeste placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, but he shook her off without even looking at her, his entire focus now locked on me with laser intensity. "Valentina, please," he said, taking a step onto the dance floor. "We need to talk now." The entire ballroom held its breath. This was the moment in every romantic drama where the heroine either melts at the hero's desperate plea or stands her ground. I could feel Diego beside me, solid and supportive, but not possessive, waiting for my decision without pressuring me in either direction. "No, Marcus," I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We don't need to talk now. Right now, I'm dancing with someone who actually wants to dance with me." The collective ooh from the crowd was like a physical wave. Someone, I think it was Rosa's maid of honor, actually started a slow clap. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Diego squeezed my hand gently. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. "Because once we start this next dance, there's no going back to invisible." I looked around the ballroom, at the eager faces of the guests, at Rosa's proud smile, at Celeste's barely concealed fury, at Marcus's devastated expression. For 2 years, I had made myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. I had dimmed my light so others could shine brighter. I had accepted being overlooked, undervalued, taken for granted. Tonight, that ended. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it completely. The orchestra launched into a passionate tango, and Diego pulled me against him with a confidence that sent heat racing through my veins. This wasn't the polite, respectful dancing of before. This was fire and intensity, and two people moving together like they were the only ones in the room. As we swept across the floor, I caught glimpses of the watching faces. Some were delighted by the unexpected entertainment, others scandalized by the public drama. But all of them were watching me, really seeing me, for the first time all evening. And in that moment, as Diego dipped me low enough that my hair brushed the polished marble, I realized something profound. I had spent so long waiting to be chosen that I had forgotten I could choose myself. The golden dress, the careful makeup, the elaborate planning, none of it had been for Marcus, really. It had all been for this moment, when I finally stepped into my own power and claimed the attention I deserved. The song reached its climactic end with Diego supporting me in a dramatic lean, my back arched, the golden dress pooling around us like liquid light. The ballroom erupted in applause, and as he helped me back to my feet, I saw Marcus still standing exactly where I had left. Him finally understanding what he was losing. But for the first time all evening, I wasn't thinking about Marcus at all. Words that cut deeper than silence. The applause was still ringing in my ears when I felt a firm grip on my elbow. Marcus had finally worked up the courage to approach, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that looked dangerously close to anger. "We're leaving," he said through gritted teeth, his voice low but audible to the guests nearby, who were pretending not to eavesdrop. "Get your purse, now." For a split second, the old Valentina almost surfaced, the one who would have apologized, gathered her things quickly, and followed him out to avoid making a scene. But that woman had died somewhere between the salsa and the tango, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. "No," I said simply, removing his hand from my arm with deliberate gentleness. "I'm not leaving." Marcus's eyes widened as if I had slapped him. "What do you mean, no?" "Valentina, you're embarrassing yourself. Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," I replied, smoothing my dress with hands that were remarkably steady. "For the first time tonight, they're staring for the right reasons." Diego materialized beside me with 2 champagne flutes, offering one to me with a small, encouraging smile. His presence was like an anchor, solid, supportive, but not overwhelming. "Perhaps we should step outside for some air," he suggested, diplomatically. "The gardens are lovely this time of evening." Marcus's face darkened. "We don't need a third party in our private conversation." "Actually," I said, accepting the champagne from Diego, "there is no we having a conversation. You spent the entire evening showing me exactly where your priorities lie. I'm simply following your example and putting my attention somewhere it's appreciated." The words hung in the air between us like a blade. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to sputter. "That's not your being ridiculous. Celeste is family. I was just being polite." "Polite," I repeated, tasting the word like it was bitter wine. "Is that what you call forgetting your girlfriend exists for 3 hours?" Around us, conversations had quieted to a murmur as guests strained to overhear our exchange. Rosa caught my eye from across the room, her expression concerned but supportive. She had witnessed enough of Marcus's casual dismissals over the past 2 years to know this confrontation was long overdue. "Look," Marcus said, running his hand through his hair in the gesture I had once found endearing, "maybe I got a little carried away. But you're being dramatic. One night of dancing doesn't mean anything." "You're right," I agreed, and watched. Relief flicker across his face. One night of dancing doesn't mean anything, just like one night of being ignored, overlooked, and treated like I'm invisible doesn't mean anything. But 2 years of it? That means everything. The relief vanished from Marcus's expression, replaced by something that looked like panic. "Valentina, you're overreacting. We can work this out. Just come with me. Let's go somewhere private and talk about this like adults." Before I could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like silk. "Marcus, darling, there you are." Celeste. Rivera glided up to our small group with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to making dramatic entrances. Her burgundy dress seemed to shimmer in the ballroom lighting, and her smile was perfectly calibrated to appear both innocent and predatory. She slipped her arm through Marcus's with casual familiarity, completely ignoring both Diego and me. "I was hoping we could finish our conversation about your promotion," she said, her voice pitched to carry just far enough to ensure nearby guests could overhear. "It sounds absolutely fascinating." The irony was almost too perfect. Here was Marcus, caught between the woman he had ignored all evening and the one he couldn't resist, while I stood, watching with complete clarity for the first time in our relationship. "Celeste," I said pleasantly, "how lovely that you're taking such an interest in Marcus's career. I'm sure you two have so much to discuss." Something flickered in Celeste's dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I wasn't reacting with jealousy or tears. She had orchestrated this entire evening's drama with the precision of a conductor, expecting me to play the role of the scorned girlfriend while she claimed the prize. "Oh, Valentina," she said with false sweetness, "I hope you don't mind that. I borrowed Marcus for so much of the evening, but you seemed so content sitting by yourself. I thought you preferred observing to participating." The comment was designed to wound, to reduce me to the wallflower role she had cast me in since childhood. But instead of the expected sting, I felt only a cool sense of detachment. "Actually," I replied, taking a sip of my champagne, "I've discovered that participating is much more rewarding than observing. Haven't I, Diego?" Diego's smile was warm and genuine as he moved slightly closer to me. "Absolutely. Though I have to say, Valentina, you've been the most captivating part of this entire evening." Celeste's perfect composure finally cracked, her smile becoming brittle around the edges. She wasn't accustomed to being upstaged, especially not by her quieter cousin, who had always faded into the background at family gatherings. "How sweet," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of acid. "Diego, isn't it? The photographer?" She looked him up and down with barely concealed disdain. "I'm sure your work keeps you very busy." "It does," Diego agreed mildly, apparently unbothered by her obvious attempt to diminish him. "Though I have to say, tonight has been particularly rewarding. There's nothing quite like capturing genuine emotion and authentic moments." The subtle emphasis on genuine and authentic was not lost on anyone in our small circle. Celeste's grip tightened on Marcus's arm, but he was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between desperation and dawning respect. "Valentina," Marcus said, pulling away from Celeste's grasp, "please, can we just step outside for 5 minutes? Just the two of us. I need to explain." "No, Marcus." The words came out with quiet finality. "You don't get to ignore me all evening and then demand my attention when you realize someone else values it. That's not how relationships work. But we've been together for 2 years. 2 years during which you've consistently shown me that—" "I'm not a priority," I interrupted. "Tonight was just the most public example." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: anger, hurt, confusion, and finally, a terrible understanding. "So that's it? You're throwing away everything we have because I danced with your cousin?" The question revealed everything wrong with his perspective. Even now, he couldn't see the real issue. It wasn't about the dancing. It was about the pattern, the consistent message that I wasn't worth his full attention, his consideration, his respect. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said gently. "I'm simply refusing to accept scraps when I deserve a feast." The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, guests had given up all pretense of not listening, and even the orchestra seemed to have paused between songs. Rosa was making her way through the crowd toward us, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. Celeste, sensing that the evening was slipping away from her control, made one last desperate play. "Well," she said with a laugh that sounded forced, "I suppose some people just can't handle a little friendly competition." But this time, her barb fell flat. The woman she was trying to wound no longer existed. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, someone who refused to compete for attention that should have been freely given. "You're absolutely right, Celeste," I agreed. "I can't handle competition. That's why I choose not to participate in it anymore." I turned to Diego, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the entire exchange. "Would you like to get some air now? I think the gardens would be lovely." As we walked away, I heard Marcus call my name one more time, his voice cracking with genuine emotion. For just a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the instinct to comfort and reassure. But I kept walking, my golden dress trailing behind me like a banner of independence, finally understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst impulses. The cool night air felt like freedom against my skin. The dawn of self-discovery. The gardens at Riverstone Manor were even more magical than I had imagined. Fairy lights twinkled like earthbound stars among the ancient oak trees, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine hung heavy in the warm air. A stone fountain gurgled softly in the center of the courtyard, its gentle music providing a peaceful counterpoint to the distant sounds of celebration still drifting from the ballroom. Diego and I walked in comfortable silence along the winding gravel path, the drama of the past hour settling around us like dust after a storm. My golden dress rustled softly with each step, and I was surprised to realize that despite everything that had just happened, I felt lighter than I had in months. "Are you all right?" Diego asked eventually, his voice gentle in the darkness. I considered the question seriously. Was I all right? My 2-year relationship had just ended in spectacular public fashion. I had confronted my manipulative cousin in front of half of Rosa's wedding guests. I had walked away from the familiar, even if it was toxic, into complete uncertainty. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself with a laugh. "I think I'm better than all right. I think I'm finally awake." We settled on a wrought iron bench near the fountain, and Diego turned to face me more fully. In the soft light from the fairy lights, his face was kind but serious. That took real courage in there, standing up for yourself like that, in front of everyone. It didn't feel like courage, I admitted. It felt like necessity, like I finally reached a point where accepting less than I deserve became more painful than the fear of being alone. Diego nodded thoughtfully. "I've been watching people through a camera lens for years now, and you know what I've learned? The most beautiful photographs are always the ones where people are being authentically themselves. Tonight, watching you dance, watching you find your voice, that was the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time." Heat rose in my cheeks, but this time it wasn't embarrassment. It was the warm glow of being truly seen, truly appreciated. "Thank you for dancing with me tonight, for reminding me that I deserve someone's full attention." "Valentina," he said softly, "you deserve so much more than just attention. You deserve someone who sees your light and wants to help it shine brighter, not someone who dims it so they can feel more important." Before I could respond, the sound of heels on gravel announced someone's approach. Rosa appeared around a bend in the path, still radiant in her wedding dress despite the late hour and the evening's drama. "I wondered if I might find you out." "Here," she said with a gentle smile. "The party's winding down, but I couldn't let the night end without checking on my little sister." Diego stood immediately. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, but Rosa waved him back down. "Please stay. You've been more of a gentleman tonight than some people who've known our family for years." Her tone was light, but there was steel. Underneath it, Rosa had never been one to tolerate disrespect toward the people she loved. She gathered her voluminous skirts and settled on Diego's other side, creating a small circle of intimacy in the moonlit garden. "So," she said without preamble, "how are we feeling about the great liberation of Valentina Rodriguez?" "Despite everything," I laughed. "Is that what we're calling it?" "That's exactly what we're calling it," Rosa said firmly. "Val, I've watched you shrink yourself for that man for 2 years. Tonight, you finally took up the space you deserve. I'm proud of you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on Marcus's reaction, on the guests' whispers, on the drama of it all, that I hadn't stopped to consider how my own family viewed what had happened. "Even though I caused a scene at your wedding?" I asked quietly. Rosa's laugh was music in the night air. "Sweetheart, you didn't cause a scene. You provided entertainment. Do you know how many of my friends came up to me in the last hour to tell me how impressed they were with your grace under pressure? How many of them said they wished they had your courage?" "Really? Really?" Aunt Carmen actually said, and I quote, "That girl has more class in her little finger than Celeste has in her entire body." Rosa's impression of our elderly aunt's voice was spot on, complete with the slight lisp and dramatic hand gestures. I felt tears prick my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain. "I was so scared I had ruined your perfect day." "Oh, honey," Rosa said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "The only thing that could have ruined my perfect day would have been watching you continue to accept treatment you don't deserve. What you did tonight, standing up for yourself, demanding better, that made me prouder than any flawless ceremony could have. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the three of us watching the fountain's gentle spray catch the light from the fairy lights. Finally, Diego spoke up. I hope you don't mind me asking, but what happens now? I mean, practically speaking. It was a fair question. Marcus and I shared an apartment lease. We had mutual friends, shared routines, intertwined lives. The practical reality of disentangling from a 2-year relationship was daunting, even when you knew it was the right thing to do. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. I've been living minute to minute since I made the decision to dance with you. Well, Rosa said practically, you can stay with James and me as long as you need to. We're leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow, but you have keys to the house. Take some time to figure out what you want, not what you think you should want. The offer was like a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. On newlyweds. Valentina Rodriguez, Rosa said in her stern, older sister voice. You are not an imposition. You are my sister, and I love you, and I want to see you build a life that makes you happy. Diego cleared his throat softly. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I'd like to see you again, when you're ready, whenever that is. No pressure, no expectations, just I'd like the chance to take you to dinner and have a real conversation without any drama or distractions. I looked at him in the soft light, this man who had appeared like a guardian angel when I needed him most, who had danced with me like I was precious, who had stood by my side as I found my voice. The smart thing would be to take time to heal, to figure out who I was outside of my relationship with Marcus. But sometimes the smart thing and the right thing were different. I'd like that too, I said. Very much. Rosa clapped her hands together softly. Perfect. And now I think we should head back inside. I want to dance with my new husband, and I want my sister to dance with her very charming photographer friend. And I want everyone to see that the Rodriguez women know how to celebrate life properly. As we stood and began walking back toward the ballroom, I caught sight of my reflection in the fountain's surface. The woman looking back at me was radiant, hair slightly mussed from dancing, cheeks flushed with excitement, eyes bright with possibility. The golden dress still caught the light beautifully, but now it looked less like a costume and more like armor I had earned. Rosa, I said as we neared the ballroom's French doors. Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for everything, but especially for showing me what it looks like when someone loves you enough to choose you every single day. Rosa stopped walking and turned to hug me tightly, her veil fluttering around us both. That's what you deserve, Val. Nothing less than that. And anyone who can't see how extraordinary you are doesn't deserve a place in your story. As we rejoined the celebration, I saw Marcus near the coat check, clearly preparing to leave. He looked up as we entered, his eyes finding mine across the room. For a moment, something passed between us. Not reconciliation, but a kind of closure, an acknowledgement that this was really over, and that perhaps it was better this way. Celeste was nowhere to be seen, probably having made her own strategic exit once it became clear that the evening's drama had not played out in her favor. The orchestra struck up one final song, something sweet and romantic that couples throughout the room gravitated toward. Diego appeared at my elbow as if summoned, offering his hand with a smile that promised nothing more complicated than joy in the moment. Shall we? He asked. We shall, I agreed, and let him lead me back onto the dance floor. As we swayed together to the gentle music, surrounded by Rosa's friends and family, I realized that this wasn't an ending at all. This was a beginning, the first night of a life where I refused to settle, where I demanded to be seen and valued and chosen. The golden dress caught the light one last time as Diego spun me gently, and I laughed with pure, uncomplicated happiness. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already planning the story I would tell my future children about the night their mother learned to dance, learned to demand better, learned to choose herself. It had taken a wedding, a devastating betrayal, and a childhood friend with kind eyes to teach me the most important lesson of my life. I was worth fighting for, even if the person doing the fighting had to be me. The music ended. The evening drew to a close. But my real story was just beginning.